Scene 1 of the family secret unfolds with a quiet intensity that immediately centers the interior life of a young woman standing at the threshold between secrecy and self-recognition, using stillness rather than spectacle to explore what it means to come into oneself under the weight of conditional belonging. The opening image of Helena immersed in yoga and meditation establishes her as a figure of grounded presence, someone who appears to see more than she says, and for the narrator, this gaze feels almost dangerous, as though her carefully constructed invisibility might be pierced. That fear is not abstract. It is rooted in a lifetime of instability, of being passed between families and learning, again and again, that acceptance can be temporary and love conditional. At 18, legally an adult but emotionally still dependent, she occupies a precarious space familiar to many queer women, particularly those raised in environments where deviation from expectation risks exile. Her first date with a girl carries the weight of possibility and terror, not because of who she is, but because of what she might lose if that truth is known. And when the date goes poorly, the disappointment is compounded by shame, as though she has failed at something she has barely been allowed to imagine. Returning home in tears, she expects solitude, but instead encounters Helena's insistence on presence, a gentle refusal to let pain pass unnoticed, which immediately reframes the home as a potential site of safety rather than surveillance. Helena's assurance that she will love her no matter what is radical in its simplicity, offering unconditional care without demanding explanation or performance, and it is within this emotional safety that the narrator finally speaks the words, "I'm a lesbian," naming not just desire but fear, inexperience, and longing all at once. For queer audiences, especially those who came out young or under constraint, this confession resonates deeply, capturing the layered vulnerability of admitting not only who you are but how unprepared you feel to live that truth in a world that has not made space for it. The narrator's anxiety about inexperience reflects a broader cultural pressure placed on queer women to arrive fully formed, confident, and fluent in desire, as though uncertainty invalidates identity. And Helena's response quietly challenges that narrative by treating inexperience not as a deficit but as a natural part of becoming. The meditation Helena introduces is significant not for any physical act, but for its symbolism, reframing intimacy as presence, breath, and consent with oneself before it is ever shared with another, which stands in contrast to societal discomfort with women, and especially queer women, claiming agency over their own readiness. This moment resists voyeurism by keeping the focus on interior awakening rather than external action, honoring the narrator's desire for her first experience to be meaningful, chosen, and rooted in love rather than pressure or secrecy. Her thoughts returning to Haley, the woman she loves but has not yet named aloud, underscore the quiet truth that love often precedes permission, existing long before it is socially sanctioned or personally articulated. Helena's role in this scene is emotionally complex. She is not a seducer or savior, but a facilitator of self-trust, embodying a form of queer mentorship that is rarely depicted without sensationalism. And the film's restraint here is powerful, refusing to turn guidance into transgression. Instead, Helena represents the possibility of chosen family, of adults who do not exploit vulnerability but protect it, offering a counter-narrative to the narrator's history of rejection. The scene also speaks to women more broadly, queer or not, who have been taught to minimize their desires to preserve belonging, showing how that suppression fractures the self over time. Society's discomfort with women expressing same-sex desire is mirrored in the narrator's fear of being disowned, a fear that persists because queer love is still framed as disruptive to family stability rather than a legitimate expression of selfhood. By centering emotional truth instead of conflict, the scene challenges that discomfort, suggesting that what truly destabilizes families is not honesty, but the demand for silence. Ultimately, Scene 1 is about becoming visible first to oneself, about learning that readiness is not granted by experience but by self-acceptance, and that love, when it is real, does not require perfection or proof. For LGBTQ+ viewers seeking authenticity, this moment offers recognition rather than fantasy, honoring the slow, often painful process of claiming identity in a world that asks you to justify it, and affirming that choosing yourself, even quietly, is an act of profound courage. Scene 2 of The Family Secret deepens the emotional complexity of the story by shifting from the private, interior awakening of the previous night into the daylight clarity of conversation, where truths spoken aloud carry consequences and weight, and where intimacy must be examined, rather than simply felt. Morning brings Kenzie downstairs into the kitchen, a domestic space that symbolizes both comfort and exposure, and the awkwardness she feels is not rooted in anything explicit but in the knowledge that something irreversible has shifted inside her, a quiet internal threshold crossed through self-recognition rather than action. Helena's calm presence contrasts with Kenzie's nervous energy, reinforcing the generational and experiential gap between them. Yet the conversation that unfolds is marked by honesty rather than secrecy, an important distinction that grounds the scene in emotional realism rather than fantasy. Helena's disclosure about her marriage is not framed as scandalous, but as deliberate and thoughtful, revealing a woman who has made pragmatic choices within the constraints of her time, culture, and desires, and who has negotiated a life that balances responsibility with authenticity as best she knows how. Her explanation of meeting her husband in college, recognizing his kindness, his suitability as a partner and father, and choosing him not out of passion but out of shared values, resonates with many women who have navigated heterosexual expectations while quietly carrying queerness inside them, often believing that compromise is the only way to survive without rupture. The arrangement Helena describes is not presented as titillating, but as a symptom of long-term repression and negotiation, an attempt to carve out space for truth within a structure that was never designed to hold it. And in this way, the film invites viewers to consider how many women, particularly queer women of earlier generations, built lives that looked stable from the outside while quietly rationing their own freedom. Kenzie's reaction, her heart skipping a beat at the implication that Helena might one day choose a woman for her allotted freedom, is less about desire in a physical sense and more about the sudden, dizzying realization that queerness can exist openly, spoken plainly, without shame or catastrophe, and that adults can acknowledge desire without it consuming or destroying them. For queer audiences, especially young lesbians, this moment reflects the confusing mix of validation and vulnerability that comes from being seen by someone who names what you are before you have fully learned how to carry it yourself. And the film is careful to keep this tension internal rather than acted upon, emphasizing thought and feeling over impulse. Importantly, the scene does not resolve this tension or romanticize it. Instead, it leaves it suspended, allowing space for ethical awareness, boundaries, and self-reflection, which is crucial in avoiding harmful narratives while still honoring emotional truth. Helena's role here is symbolic rather than romantic. She represents a possible future, a mirror of what it looks like to live partially out and partially hidden, and Kenzie's reaction becomes a quiet reckoning with the kind of woman she does and does not want to become. This dynamic speaks to broader themes women often face, queer or not, around mentorship, admiration, and the thin line between inspiration and projection, particularly when one woman embodies freedoms another has not yet claimed. Society's discomfort with women expressing desire for women is echoed in the need Helena feels to explain and justify her marriage, her arrangement, and her identity, as though transparency requires defense, and in the way Kenzie instinctively internalizes her reaction rather than voicing it, already practicing the self-silencing that queer girls learn early. By placing this conversation in the open light of morning, the film challenges the idea that queer truth belongs only in secrecy or night, suggesting instead that clarity, honesty, and boundaries are forms of care, even when they complicate emotions. The scene also critiques the cultural assumption that unconventional relationships exist for spectacle rather than survival, showing how women craft lives that make sense to them even when those lives resist simple labels. Ultimately, Scene 2 is not about temptation but about awareness, about the moment when queerness shifts from abstract possibility into lived context, forcing Kenzie to confront her own desires, limits, and values. For LGBTQ+ viewers seeking authenticity, this scene offers something rare, a portrayal of attraction and curiosity that is acknowledged without being acted upon, framed through conversation rather than conquest, and grounded in the reality that becoming visible is as much about learning where to place one's boundaries as it is about discovering who